Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
Have you ever found yourself just standing there in a shop or maybe scrolling online and you're faced with a choice? It seems simple, but it just isn't quite straightforward. Maybe you're looking at two offers for the exact same thing. One is, a simple 10% off, clear, predictable.
Yeah, you know what you get.
Exactly. No surprises. But the other one, it's maybe a bit more tempting, like a 10% chance to get your product completely free.
Or those mystery coupons, the scratch-off kind.
Right, exactly. On the surface, which one grabs you? Which do you actually pick? And well, this isn't just about that simple choice. It's really about uncovering these hidden psychological triggers, the things that make us behave in ways that maybe don't seem purely logical.
It's a really fascinating question, isn't it? And it's one that, marketers, economists, behavioral scientists, they've all wrestled with this for a very long time.
Yeah.
So today, we're really embarking on an exploration that goes right to the heart of how we as consumers make decisions. And we're drawing directly from a really rigorously researched and thoughtfully crafted academic article.
That's right. Our whole conversation today is built on the solid foundation of an article that was published in the highly prestigious Journal of Consumer Research. And for those of you maybe just beginning your own journey into navigating the academic world, this is what's known as an FT50 listed journal. That means the Financial Times recognizes it as one of the top 50 business journals globally. It's a real hallmark of, truly impactful, rigorous research.
And the specific article we're exploring is titled, Why and When Are Uncertain Price Promotions More Effective Than Equivalent Sure Discounts? The authors are Celia Gaertig, who's an assistant professor of marketing at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, and Joseph P. Simmons, a professor of operations, information, and decisions at UPenn's Wharton School.
Right, so these are really leading minds in the field. They're contributing some pretty significant insights into how we all make decisions.
Definitely.
And for you, our listener, especially if you happen to be just starting out on your own research journey, engaging with academic work like this, it's really more than just, absorbing facts. It's about affirming something deeper. That wisdom, empathy, human understanding.
Yeah.
These things aren't just processes you can optimize with an algorithm or some kind of formula.
No, they're lived.
They're lived, exactly. They're experienced. And they're meticulously studied in fields like this. So this conversation today, we've designed it to be a clear, hopefully engaging guide through this, complex academic work, sort of demystifying the research process itself and showing just how incredibly valuable these deep insights can be for your own research, whatever field you're in.
And we really do encourage you, whether you listen to us regularly or you're just tuning in for this specific discussion, please try to make time to actually read this thoughtfully crafted, rigorous article. It's open access.
Yeah, that's a huge plus.
It is. The link, as always, will be right there in the show notes for you. Easy to find.
Okay, so let's tackle this core question then. The one that puzzles marketers, and honestly, us as consumers too. When is an uncertain offer, like that chance to get something free, actually more appealing than a straightforward discount that has the exact same expected value?
Right, because mathematically they should be the same, or sometimes the sure thing is even better if you factor in risk aversion.
Exactly. It's far more nuanced than it seems. And as we're going to discover, the research that came before this, it offered some surprisingly mixed signals. It really left a significant puzzle to solve.
Yeah, it wasn't clear at all.
So today, we're going to try and unravel why that is and figure out precisely when these uncertain promotions actually work their magic.
The puzzle of price promotions.
Okay, so to start our exploration, let's just state the obvious. We are all constantly swimming in a sea of price promotions, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. Everywhere you look.
You walk into any store, browse any website, bam, they're right there. Most of them are what we'd call sure discounts. Pretty simple, direct,
Right.
No ambiguity. 20% off sweaters, save $5 on this. You know exactly what you're getting.
Clear cut.
But then, like we mentioned, there are these other more intriguing ones. Probabilistic promotions. Offers like a 10% chance to get your product free.
Or those scratch cards you get sometimes. Scratch here to see your discount.
Exactly. those things. And big companies use them, right? Like Dell, Banana Republic, even booking sites like Hotels.com. They've woven these into their marketing and suggest they must be working, at least sometimes.
Well, what's really fascinating from a business perspective is that every company is constantly trying to figure out which approach drives more sales, or maybe builds more customer loyalty, improves the bottom line.
Right.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, academically speaking, it's not just about marketing tricks. It's a real-world example of how people make decisions when faced with uncertainty. That's a huge area in behavioral economics and marketing research. And it brings up this really fundamental, almost counterintuitive question, especially if you come from a traditional economics background.
How jazz?
If the average outcome, the expected value, is identical, why would a purely rational person ever choose the uncertain discount over the guaranteed one?
Good point. Logically, you'd take the sure thing.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
And yet these probabilistic promotions clearly persist. They often seem to thrive. So something else must be going on.
So it sounds like when researchers first started trying to unpack this, the results were, well, a bit confusing. There wasn't a clear answer on when these uncertain deals actually paid off.
That's exactly right. The picture was definitely murky. Some of the earlier work, for instance, a study by Mazar and colleagues back in 2017, actually suggested that maybe probabilistic promotions were always more effective, like universally preferred.
Always. Really?
That was the suggestion. They ran experiments where people were apparently more likely to buy something if it had, say, a 10% chance of being free compared to just getting a straight 10% off. Think about it. You're choosing between a guaranteed dollar off a $10 item or a 1 in 10 shot at getting it for nothing. Their research suggested people often picked the gamble.
Interesting.
And Lee and colleagues in 2019 saw something similar in a supermarket setting. Shoppers seem to prefer a tiny 1% chance to get their whole basket free over just getting 1% off the total.
Wow. Okay.
So initially, it really looked like maybe the allure of free or just the excitement of the gamble consistently won out.
Yeah, I mean, at first glance, it really does sound like uncertainty often wins, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That maybe the thrill or the maybe distant hope of getting something for free is just too powerful. But knowing how behavioral economics works, how it often reveals these hidden layers, I'm guessing it wasn't quite that simple.
You are spot on. The real puzzle starts to emerge because other research came along and found conflicting results, like directly contradictory findings.
Okay. So it wasn't a slam dunk for uncertainty?
Not at all. For example, a 2022 study by Atari and colleagues often found the opposite. They frequently observed that fewer than half of their participants actually chose the probabilistic offer, especially when the items were more expensive, or when the sure discount felt more substantial.
So not just pennies off, but real money.
Exactly. This conflicting evidence was a strong signal that we were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. We didn't understand when. When are these uncertain promotions actually effective, and when do they just, fall flat?
Right.
The landscape clearly wasn't as simple as probabilistic is always better. There had to be some kind of moderator, a hidden condition influencing the choice.
And this is where it gets really interesting, especially for someone trying to understand how research questions actually develop, how new studies build on what came before. So after seeing these mixed signals, our authors, Gaertig and Simmons, they zeroed in on this key question: when? When does uncertainty win? And their hypothesis, I think for anyone who's deep in their own research right now, it's just a masterclass in refining a research question, isn't it?
It really is. Their core idea is, it's elegant in its simplicity, but it has profound implications. They propose that probabilistic price promotions are more attractive than the equivalent sure discounts only when those sure discounts seem trivial.
Only when they seem trivial. Okay.
It's a critical distinction. It shifts the focus away from just the objective value of the discount.
The actual dollars and cents.
Right. Towards its perceived value, how it feels to the consumer, how it registers in their mind. This really challenges that earlier idea of a universal preference for the gamble.
And what's particularly insightful here, maybe a great lesson for new researchers thinking about designing their own studies, is that this paper suggests that even objectively large, sure discounts,
like, say, $50 off.
Yeah, even those can be strategically manipulated to feel small. And that perception, that feeling, can dramatically change consumer preferences, making the uncertain offer suddenly look much better.
Exactly. And this includes factors like the broader context, what other numbers are around when the discount is presented, or even just how it's framed.
Like words matter.
Words definitely matter. Is it presented as a percentage off or a specific dollar amount off?
It's a deep dive into the psychology, showing how our perception can actually trump the objective reality sometimes.
Unpacking a peanuts effect and risk preferences.
So to really get a handle on this price promotion dynamic, we kind of need to zoom out a bit, put it in a broader behavioral context.
Okay.
The question of whether you prefer a sure discount or a probabilistic one is really a specific example of a much larger, much more fundamental question in behavioral economics.
Which is, are people generally risk averse? Meaning, do we prefer certainty, guaranteed outcomes, or are we risk seeking? Do we prefer uncertainty, the chance of a bigger, even if less certain, gain?
You'd think there'd be a clear answer to that. I mean, it seems so central to how we make decisions.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly complex, isn't it?
It really is, because on one hand, you've got the foundational work of prospect theory, right? Kahneman and Tversky.
He's a Nobel Prize winner.
Exactly. And their theory, backed by decades of research, strongly suggests that when it comes to gains, people are generally risk averse.
Okay.
So most of us, if you offer a choice between a guaranteed $20 or a 50-50 shot at winning $40.
I take the $20.
Most people do, yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the expected value mathematically is the same. That's classic risk aversion, a bird in the hand, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But then you look around at how people actually behave in the real world and you see this paradox.
How so?
Well, think about the massive popularity of lotteries or the casino industry or sports betting these days.
Huge industries.
Huge. And these activities, by their very nature, just scream risk-seeking. People are actively choosing uncertainty, often against pretty terrible odds for the thrill or for that slim chance of a massive payoff.
Right. So we're risk-averse with small, sure gains, but risk-seeking when it comes to long shots.
It seems that way sometimes, and this raises the important question that's puzzled researchers for ages. What causes this apparent shift? Why are we risk-averse in some situations and risk-seeking in others? It's clearly not a fixed personality trait. It depends on the context.
Okay, so it's context dependent, and that's where this idea of the peanuts effect comes into play, right? It sounds kind of funny, but I get the feeling it describes something pretty fundamental about how we view risk.
It does. Researchers have pinpointed one really critical factor, a moderator, that helps explain this shift between risk aversion and risk seeking, and that is the size of the stakes involved.
How much money is actually on the table?
Precisely. And that's what the peanuts effect describes. It suggests that people become relatively more risk-seeking when the monetary amounts involved are very small. Almost trivial, like peanuts.
Okay, I think I get it. So the idea is the psychological cost of gambling, that sort of discomfort you feel with uncertainty. It feels really high when the potential gain is significant. But when the amounts are tiny peanuts, that discomfort just shrinks. And suddenly the thrill of maybe winning even a small amount feels more appealing.
That's a great way to put it. Your brain just processes small amounts differently. The downside risk feels negligible, so the potential upside, even if small, looms larger, relatively speaking.
So to make that concrete, like if I found a couple bucks on the street, I might totally buy a lottery ticket with it, right? Because it feels like found money, trivial.
And low stakes. But if it's the last bit of cash in my wallet, or if we're talking about a choice between, say, a 25% chance to get $4,000 versus a guaranteed $1,000.
You're probably taking the $1,000.
Yeah, almost certainly. The effect is about that relative change in how we feel about risk when the amounts are minuscule.
Precisely. And this paper's authors, Gaertig and Simmons, they really use this insight as their launch pad. They went back and reviewed that earlier, confusing research on probabilistic promotions, but this time they looked at it specifically through the lens of the peanuts effect.
Okay, so they were looking for a pattern related to the size of the discounts.
Exactly. And they observed something compelling. Those prior studies that consistently showed a preference for the probabilistic promotions, like the Mazar study, the Lee study, they often involved low-priced products.
Like what?
Like a 75-cent candy bar, or a $4.50 DVD, or even that 1% discount on a $300 shopping basket that's only $3.
Right. Those are definitely peanuts territory for most people. The guaranteed saving was objectively small.
Yes. So this suggested a really crucial pattern. Maybe probabilistic promotions seem more effective simply when the equivalent sure discounts are smaller, objectively speaking.
And this is such a key observation for new researchers, isn't it? By carefully combing through the existing literature, looking for these common threads like the low-stakes nature of the discounts here, you can start to build a much stronger, more refined hypothesis.
Absolutely. It's about seeing beyond just the surface findings and looking for those underlying mechanisms, those hidden connections between studies that might seem unrelated at first glance.
Yeah, like finding that missing puzzle piece that suddenly makes the whole picture make sense.
The objective size of discounts matters, studies 1 and 2.
So before they launched into their main big experiments, the authors did some pilot testing first. This is a really common thing in research, right? And super smart.
Oh, absolutely essential, I'd say. It lets you sort of kick the tires on your ideas.
Yeah.
You can fine-tune your experimental design, test out your materials, make sure the questions make sense, and get those first hints that maybe your hypothesis is actually on the right track before you invest all the time and resources into a much larger study.
Right. So what did these preliminary experiments, these pilot studies, show them?
Well, they provided really strong initial support for their main idea that the objective size of the sure discount really matters a lot.
Okay.
In what they call supplemental studies, S1A through C, they played around with the percentage of the discount. This was for a hypothetical hotel booking, so maybe 1% off versus 10% off.
Right.
And they found participants were significantly more likely to go for the probabilistic option, the gamble, when the percentage and therefore the actual dollar amount of the sure discount was objectively smaller.
So like 1% off a $210 booking is just $2.10.
Exactly. And $2.10 to most people feels pretty small, almost negligible, right? So in that case, the chance to maybe get the whole $210 booking free suddenly looks much more appealing in comparison.
Okay, that makes sense. And then in another pilot supplemental study, S2, they did something slightly different. They changed the price of the product itself.
Precisely. So this time they kept the discount percentage the same, say 10%, but they looked at different base prices for the hotel.
Ah, clever. So isolating the dollar amount again, but in a different way.
Exactly. So they compared a $48 hotel room versus a much pricier $480 hotel stay, both with a 10% discount offer.
So the sure discount would be $4.80 for the cheap hotel and $48 for the expensive one.
Correct. And just as the Peanuts effect would predict, the probabilistic promotion, the chance to get it free, was significantly more attractive for the cheaper $48 hotel because the sure alternative, $4.80, felt relatively small.
Right. Peanuts again.
Peanuts again. But for the $480 hotel, where the sure discount was a much more substantial $48, people were far less tempted by the gamble. They were more likely to just take the sure $48 off.
Okay.
So this really reinforced the idea that the objective size of that sure discount is critical. And for, aspiring researchers listening, these pilot studies are just a fantastic example of how you systematically isolate variables to test your ideas step by step.
Yeah, definitely. So building on that solid foundation from the pilots, the researchers knew they were onto something real. Time for the main event, right? The larger, more controlled experiments to really test this hypothesis rigorously. Let's get into their main studies. Study 1 used those hotel bookings again, right, to really try and quantify this impact of the objective discount size. How did they set that one up to get such clear data?
Okay, so in study 1, participants again faced this direct choice. Take a sure discount or go for a probabilistic promotion on a hypothetical hotel stay. The researchers very cleverly manipulated two key things, and importantly, they used a between subjects design.
Okay, what does between subjects mean for listeners?
Good question. It means that each participant only saw one version of the scenario. So one group saw one combination of discount and price, another group saw a different combination.
Ah, so they couldn't compare the different options directly.
Exactly. This prevents people from sort of guessing the purpose of the study or having their choice in one scenario influence their choice in another. It gives you a cleaner read on how each specific condition affects behavior.
Got it. So what were the two things they manipulated?
They varied the promotion percentage, either a really small 1% or a more noticeable 10%. And they varied the hotel price, either a low $48 for one night or a much higher $480 for 10 nights.
Okay, so mixing and matching those gives you quite a range of sure discount values.
Precisely. This careful design meant the sure discount amounts ranged from a tiny 48 cents.
Wow, yeah, that's definitely peanuts.
Which was 1% off the $48 hotel, all the way up to a pretty substantial $48, which was 10% off the $480 hotel. So they covered a really wide spectrum from objectively trivial to objectively non-trivial discounts.
And the results. Did this systematic manipulation confirm the pattern they saw in the pilots?
It absolutely did. The results were remarkably clear, very consistent with their predictions, and gave really strong support for their first main proposition. Participants were much, much more likely to choose the probabilistic promotion, the gamble, when the sure discount was objectively smaller.
Regardless of why it was smaller.
Okay.
Like low percentage or low price.
Exactly. It held true both ways. For instance, the highest preference for the gamble, where over half the people chose it, was for that tiny 48-cent discount.
Oh.
And the lowest preference for the gamble, where only a minority chose it, was for the largest $48 discount.
Right.
So this study really nailed down that the objective size of the show discount plays a critical role. It strongly influences how appealing that probabilistic alternative looks, just like the Peanuts effect predicts.
Okay, but one question that might pop up is, maybe it's just the magic word free. Maybe the incredible allure of potentially getting something for absolutely nothing is the real driver here, not necessarily how trivial the sure discount feels. Did they test that specifically? Try to isolate the free factor.
They did. And this is such a critical validation for their theory. It really shows excellent research rigor, thinking through alternative explanations.
Yeah.
So in study 2, they kept the sure discount fixed at 10% off the price. But this time, they varied the probabilistic promotion.
Okay, how?
In one condition, it was the standard 10% chance to get it for free. That one includes the powerful zero price outcome.
Right.
In the other condition, they offered a 20% chance to get it for half price. Now, crucially, both of these probabilistic offers have the exact same expected value as the sure 10% discount.
Okay. So mathematically equivalent, but one dangles free and the other just dangles cheaper.
Precisely. This design allowed them to really disentangle the specific effect of offering something for free from the more general effect related to the perceived size of that sure 10% discount. It was a really sharp test of their underlying mechanism.
And what did they find? Did free blow everything else out of the water, or was the size of the sure discount still the main story?
The key finding, the really important one, was that the effect of the product price and therefore the size of the sure discount still held strong. It was consistent.
Okay.
Probabilistic promotions, whether they offered free or half price, were consistently more attractive when the product price was low, $48, compared to when it was high, $480.
Interesting.
Now, it is true that on average, people were generally a bit more inclined toward the free option. I mean, let's be honest, free is always powerful psychologically.
Yeah, it has a special pull.
It does. But the critical point here is that the size of the sure discount remained the consistent, powerful driver of preference across both types of probabilistic offers.
Yeah.
This really strengthens their argument. It suggests it's primarily about the perceived triviality of the sure thing. It's not just about the magnetic pull of getting something for free. Often, it's the perceived insignificance of the guaranteed alternative that makes us willing to take the gamble.
That really reshapes how you think about these everyday choices, doesn't it? It's less about chasing the big win and more about whether the sure thing feels worth taking.
The subjective feeling of trivial,
Yeah.
studies 3, 4, and 5.
And this leads us right into the absolute core of their conceptual framework. It's built on these two really insightful propositions that push our understanding beyond just the objective numbers.
Okay.
So Proposition 1 basically states that people will be more likely to prefer a probabilistic promotion when the sure discount feels smaller. Not just is smaller objectively, but feels smaller.
Right, the subjective perception.
Exactly. This directly challenges those earlier, simpler ideas that probabilistic promotions are maybe always better. It brings in this crucial nuanced element of consumer perception.
So it's not just about the numbers on the tag, it's deeply about how we interpret those numbers, whether they register as trivial or significant in our minds. And Proposition 2 builds on that.
It does. Proposition 2 really takes it a step further. It says it's not only when the stakes are objectively small, like our 48-cent discount example, it's also when they can merely feel small, even if their objective value hasn't changed at all.
Whoa. Okay, so now we're getting into the really fascinating psychological territory for new researchers. How subtle cues, things like the context or just how you word something, can actually alter our perception of value, even when the underlying math is identical.
Precisely. It's about how the mind can be nudged, how perception can be shaped.
Okay, so if the objective value stays the same, how on earth do you actually manage to make the same sure discount feel smaller to someone without changing its actual monetary worth? That sounds like a really clever experimental trick.
Study 3 used a very clever, very elegant approach to demonstrate exactly this. Participants were asked to imagine they were buying a gym membership and also some personal training sessions.
Okay, common scenario.
Right. The personal training sessions always cost $50. And the choice for the training was always between a $5 sure discount or a 10% chance to get those sessions for free. That part was constant.
$5 off versus a 1 in 10 chance of free. Got it.
The brilliance was in manipulating the context provided by the gym membership. For some participants, the gym membership was framed as an expensive yearly cost, say $480 per year, and it came with its own $48 discount.
Okay, big numbers.
Big numbers. So in that context, the $5 discount on the personal training probably felt relatively tiny, right? Almost like peanuts compared to the hundreds of dollars in the $48 discount for the membership itself.
Yeah, I can see that. $5 looks small next to $480 and $48.
But for other participants, the gym membership was framed as a monthly cost, only $40 per month, with its own smaller $4 discount.
Smaller surrounding numbers.
Exactly. So in that context, the very same $5 discount on the personal training likely felt comparatively larger, more significant, because the surrounding numbers were much smaller.
Wow. So the $5 discount on the training was objectively the exact same $5 in both conditions, but just changing the numbers around the gym membership completely altered its perceived size. It's a powerful demonstration of context.
It truly is. And just as they predicted, participants were significantly more likely to choose the probabilistic promotion, the 10% chance of free training, when that $5 sure discount was presented in the context of the larger yearly gym membership fee and its $48 discount.
Because the $5 felt trivial in that context.
Precisely. This result beautifully illustrates that the surrounding environment, the comparative context, can absolutely make a sure discount feel trivial, even if it's not objectively tiny on its own. It's a fantastic lesson for researchers. Sometimes the deepest insights come from manipulating the perceived reality, not just the objective facts.
Yeah. And for marketers, it shows how you can make even a modest discount seem more appealing just by positioning it cleverly next to something much larger.
Yep.
Okay, this next one, Study 4, feels incredibly practical. Like something a marketer could use tomorrow. It's about phrasing, right? Does how you word the discount, just the label, like saying percentage off versus dollar amount off, actually make a difference in how people perceive it and what they choose?
It absolutely does. And this study provides really compelling evidence for it. Now, again, showing good practice, the authors first ran a pretest. This is something any aspiring researcher should consider testing your assumptions first.
Right. Check the basics before the main experiment.
Exactly. They wanted to see if framing a discount as a percentage versus a dollar amount actually changed how big or small it felt. And they found that, yes, generally a 10% discount felt smaller to people when it was just stated as 10% off compared to when it was spelled out as the equivalent dollar amount, like $1.10's off an $11 item.
That's fascinating. So our brains just process 10% differently than $1.10, even if they mean the exact same saving on that item.
It seems so. The abstract percentage feels somehow less concrete, maybe less substantial than the specific dollar figure. It's not about the math ability, it's about the mental representation it triggers.
Okay, so they established that framing affects perception in the pretest. Then in Study 4, they put it to the choice test.
Yes. In Study 4 proper, participants again made a choice. Probabilistic promotion, 10% chance of free, versus a sure discount. But this time, the sure discount was framed either as a percentage, like 10% off, or as the equivalent dollar amount, like $1.10 off for an $11 product, or $31.10 off for a $311 product. The core manipulation was just that framing, just the words used.
And the outcome. Did saying 10% off push people towards the gamble more than saying $1.10's off?
Significantly so. They found that people were much more likely to choose the probabilistic promotion when the sure discount was framed as a percentage rather than as a specific dollar amount. And this effect was particularly strong for the lower priced items. So what this means is, just by changing the label on the discount without changing its actual value 1 cent, you can shift consumer preferences towards taking a chance on the uncertain offer.
That's a huge insight.
It's a really powerful demonstration of subjective perception in action. For marketers, it's a remarkably simple lever to pull. If you want to make a modest sure discount feel more like peanuts and therefore boost the appeal of your uncertain probabilistic offer, consider stating that sure discount as a percentage.
Okay, so we've seen that context matters, framing matters, but this is where researchers really try to nail down the why, right? The underlying psychological mechanism. It's one thing to show that framing as a percentage makes people choose the gamble more often. It's another thing to prove why. How did they confirm that it really was the perceived size driving this and not something else? This feels like getting into the weeds of mediation analysis.
It truly is. And Study 5 was brilliantly designed to directly measure and confirm this mechanism. For anyone embarking on research, understanding mediation analysis is just a game changer. It lets you go beyond simply saying X is related to Y.
Right.
It helps you explain how X influences Y by showing that a third variable, the mediator, in this case perceived size, is the crucial psychological step in between. It proves that the perceived smallness isn't just correlated with the choice, it's actually causing the shift towards uncertainty.
Okay, so how did Study 5 measure this?
They replicated the framing manipulation from Study 4, focusing just on the low price condition, an $11 product, where framing had a strong effect. So again, participants saw the sure discount framed either as 10% off or as $1.10 off. They made their choice between that and the probabilistic 10% chance of free. But here's the crucial addition. After making their choice, participants were explicitly asked how small or large that sure discount felt to them, using a specific rating scale.
So they directly measured the subjective perception right after the choice. Smart.
Exactly. This allowed them to statistically link the framing, the perception, and the choice, all within the same study.
And what did that analysis show?
Well, first, it replicated the main finding again. People were more likely to choose the probabilistic promotion when the sure discount was framed as a percentage. No surprise there. But here's the key part for the mechanism. The sure discount felt significantly smaller to participants when it was framed as 10% off, compared to when it was framed as $1.10 off.
Okay, so the perception measure confirmed the pretest finding.
Yes. And then the mediation analysis statistically confirmed that this difference in perceived smallness directly explained why people were more likely to opt for the probabilistic promotion in the percentage frame condition.
Wow. So it really connects the dots. Framing perception choice.
Exactly. It provides incredibly powerful evidence for their conceptual framework. It shows that the subjective perception of the discount isn't just tagging along, it's acting as the mediator. It's the engine driving the preference for uncertainty in these specific conditions. It's a beautiful demonstration that how things feel often dictates our choices more profoundly than the objective reality.
Challenging established theories and broad implications.
This research does more than just give us insights into price promotions. It actually offers some fresh perspectives on broader theories of how people make choices involving risk. And that's important for you as a researcher, understanding how new findings fit into and sometimes challenge the larger academic conversation.
How so? Which theories does it challenge?
Well, for instance, some prior theories, like the idea of diminishing sensitivity to prices that Mazar and colleagues proposed back in 2017. That theory basically predicted that probabilistic promotions would always be preferred over sure discounts of the same expected value.
Always.
The logic was roughly that a small gain, like the sure discount, feels psychologically less impactful than the equivalent difference from zero, which is what the chance to get it free represents. But the consistent findings in this paper, showing that preference flips depending on perceived triviality, well, that clearly demonstrates that a universal preference just isn't true.
Right. It shows the limits of that earlier explanation. It depends.
It depends, exactly.
Okay, what about another common explanation you hear for risk-seeking? The idea that people just tend to overweigh small probabilities. Like, we get overly excited about tiny chances of big wins, which is why lotteries are popular. Could that explain these promotion preferences?
That's another important angle to consider. And while overweighting small probabilities might explain why promotions with tiny chances, like 1% or even less, can sometimes be appealing, it simply cannot account for the key findings we saw here, especially in studies 3, 4, and 5. Because in those studies, the probability itself stayed the same. It was always a 10% chance to get it free. What changed was the perceived size of the sure discount, due to context or framing.
I see. If it was all about how we perceive the 10% probability, then changing the context or framing of the sure discount shouldn't have mattered.
Precisely. Those manipulations shouldn't have had an effect if probability weighting was the whole story. This research strongly suggests that our preferences for uncertainty, at least in this domain, are much more closely tied to how we perceive the sure outcome, whether it feels trivial or substantial, than they are to how we perceive the probability of getting the uncertain reward.
That's a really significant shift in focus, isn't it? From obsessing over the probability of the gamble to looking more closely at how we feel about the guaranteed alternative.
It is. Now, it's important to add a little nuance here. The theory predicts a relative shift in preferences, meaning while the probabilistic promotion becomes more attractive when the sure discount feels trivial, it doesn't necessarily mean people suddenly prefer it in absolute terms. In many cases, consumers might still show an overall absolute preference for the sure discount.
Oh.
For instance, in those studies where they used rating scales, like studies 3 to 5, even in the conditions where the probabilistic gamble was chosen relatively more often, the average rating often still leans slightly in favor of the sure discount.
So it's not like people suddenly flip a switch and become massive risk lovers. It's more that when the sure thing feels insignificant, the gamble just becomes less unappealing or relatively more attractive.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's less about suddenly loving uncertainty and more about the guaranteed alternative losing its appeal because it feels like peanuts. The gamble becomes the least bad or more interesting option by comparison rather than an outright favorite in all cases.
Got it. A subtle but really important distinction.
It is. And looking at the bigger picture, this paper makes two really significant theoretical advances that help us understand human decision-making more broadly.
Okay, what are they?
First, it definitively confirms that the peanuts effect, that basic behavioral principle that risk-seeking increases when the stakes are small, absolutely applies within the world of price promotions. That's a crucial extension into a really important practical marketing domain.
Right, confirming the basic principle holds here.
Second, and maybe even more crucially, it extends our classic understanding of the peanuts effect. It shows it's not just about the objective size of the stakes, like the actual dollar amount. It's also about how those stakes are subjectively perceived by the consumer.
Through context and framing.
Through context, framing, and potentially other factors too. This insight really opens up a whole new way of thinking about when consumers are willing to take risks, especially when potential gains are involved. It shows that perception can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than objective reality in driving our choices.
So let's bring this back to the ground. What does all this incredibly detailed, careful research actually mean for businesses, for marketers out there trying to sell things in a really competitive world? What are the actionable takeaways?
Well, the findings offer some really useful practical guidelines. First, and maybe the most straightforward.
Yeah.
If you're selling very low-priced items, think candy bars, cheap accessories, things like that, or if you're offering very low discount percentages, like maybe only 1% or 2% off, then a probabilistic promotion, that chance to win, is likely going to be more effective than a sure discount of the same average value. The sure discount just feels too much like peanuts in those cases, making the gamble more appealing.
Okay, like my local coffee shop offering a 1 in 10 chance for a free coffee probably works better than just saying 15 cents off.
Exactly. That 15 cents off feels negligible, but the chance for a free coffee, even if small, offers that little bit of excitement.
Makes sense for cheap stuff. But what about higher priced items, where even a small percentage discount, like maybe 1% off a $1,000 laptop, is still, $10? That's not exactly peanuts.
Right. And that's where those insights about subjective perception become absolutely critical. For higher priced items, marketers need to think strategically about using context or framing to make even objectively decent sure discounts feel smaller.
Like the gym membership example.
Exactly like the gym membership example from Study 3. Presenting a $5 discount on personal training alongside a much larger gym fee and its own $48 discount made that $5 feel trivial by comparison.
Right.
So if you're selling high-ticket items, think about bundling discounts or maybe framing a smaller discount against the backdrop of a much larger overall purchase price or potential saving. It's about managing that surrounding numerical environment to shape perception.
Okay. And what about that fascinating finding on percentage versus dollar framing? That seemed incredibly easy to implement.
It did, didn't it? Their studies consistently showed that framing the sure discount as a percentage, like 10% off, rather than a specific dollar amount, like $5 off, made the discount feel smaller. And consequently, it increased the appeal of the probabilistic option.
So a clothing store might find 10% off this $50 shirt works better to push people towards a gamble than just saying $5 off.
According to this research, yes, potentially. The percentage frame seemed to make the sure discount feel more abstract, perhaps more negligible, nudging customers towards considering the uncertain chance to win promotion instead.
Interesting.
Now, of course, marketers should always test these things for their specific products, price points, and customer base, because perception can vary. But it's a powerful, yet remarkably simple tool for influencing perception without actually changing the financial value of the offer.
Yeah.
Companies that already use things like mystery coupons or scratch to win discounts might be intuitively tapping into this very effect already. The big takeaway is really to think strategically about using uncertainty in promotions. It's not a blunt instrument, it's a precise tool. You deploy it when the conditions are right specifically, when the sure alternative can be made to feel trivial.
So it's about playing to the quirks of the human mind, not just the raw number.
Precisely. Outro. You know, this work really does open up so many new and exciting questions. For you, as someone maybe just starting your research journey, think about this. Beyond the context and framing they tested here, how else could we subtly manipulate how big or small a discount feels? Like how? Well, what about framing it as an amount off versus a reduced price? Some older research hinted that might matter. Could saying $5 off feel different from saying price reduced to $45 from an original $50? Could one feel more trivial than the other?
That's a good question. Or what about the consumer side? We know people aren't all the same. How do individual differences play into this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do some people just naturally perceive discounts differently? Are some individuals just consistently more drawn to the thrill of a gamble, almost regardless of the stakes? Maybe personality traits matter, like how much someone seeks risk, or maybe how much they need things to be certain and clear, their need for closure. Could those traits moderate these effects?
Yeah, that seems plausible.
Absolutely. And another really crucial area for future research is thinking about the long-term effects. What happens to brand loyalty or customer trust if someone keeps trying for these probabilistic discounts but never wins?
Ooh, good point. Does it start to feel unfair?
Maybe. Does it erode their trust in the company? And does a bad experience with one company's probabilistic promotion make you wary of similar promotions from other companies? There could be carryover effects. Maybe even a kind of gambler's fallacy kicks in, where people feel like they're due for a win after a string of losses.
Yeah.
These are all areas ripe for more investigation, moving beyond just the single purchase decision to look at the whole long-term customer relationship.
You know, this whole exploration of price promotions, it really underscores that it's not just about clever marketing. It's so deeply rooted in the psychology of how we perceive things, how we weigh risk, how we make fundamental decisions every day. Thinking about everything we've talked through, what really stands out here? What's the biggest sort of aha moment you'd want our listeners, especially those starting research, to walk away with?
For me, I think it's the profound insight that what feels trivial, what feels like peanuts, is so incredibly subjective. It depends on the person, it depends on the context, it depends on the framing. It's not an objective fact.
Right.
And truly understanding that subjectivity, that flexibility of perception, can fundamentally change how you approach problems. Whether you're designing a marketing campaign, sure, or maybe crafting public policy messages, or most importantly, for your own research journey, designing experiments to uncover those hidden truths about human behavior.
Yeah.
It's just a powerful reminder that the really impactful insights, the ones that make a difference, often emerge when we look beyond just the obvious numbers and we really dive into the subjective human experience and ask that simple question. Okay, but how does this actually feel? And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.
রিভাইজ অ্যান্ড রিসাবমিটে স্বাগতম। আমি প্যাভলভ।
আর আমি নিকিতা। আজকের আলোচনাটা আমরা করব জার্নাল অফ কনজিউমার রিসার্চ মানে JCR এ প্রকাশিত একটা দারুণ গবেষণাপত্র নিয়ে। এটা কিন্তু একটা খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ জার্নাল, জানেন তো? মানে বিশ্বের সেরা 50টা বিজনেস জার্নালের তালিকায় পড়ে, FT50 যাকে বলে। মূলত ক্রেতাদের আচরণ নিয়েই এদের কাজ।
হ্যাঁ, খুবই সম্মানীয় একটা জার্নাল।
আর এর লেখকরাও বেশ পরিচিত। ক্যালিফোর্নিয়া বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়, বার্কলের হাস স্কুল অফ বিজনেসের সেলিয়া গার্টিক আর পেনসিলভেনিয়া বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ওয়াটন স্কুলের জোসেফ পি সিমন্স।
দুজনেই তাদের ফিল্ডে খুবই নামকরা।
আসলে এই ধরনের লেখা পড়লে একটা জিনিস মনে হয় যে প্রজ্ঞা বা মানুষের উপলব্ধি এগুলো তো ঠিক হিসেব করে অপটিমাইজ করা যায় না, তাই না? এগুলো জীবনের মধ্যে দিয়েই আসে।
ঠিক বলেছেন, অনুভব দিয়েই তৈরি হয়।
আর সেই জন্যই বলছিলাম, যারা আমাদের এই আলোচনা শুনছেন তারা যদি একটু সময় বের করে এই ওপেন অ্যাক্সেস লেখাটা পড়েন, খুব ভালো লাগবে। লিঙ্কটা আমরা শো নোটসে দিয়ে দেব।
হ্যাঁ, অবশ্যই পড়া উচিত, বিশেষ করে যারা গবেষণা জগতে নতুন আসছেন।
একদম। আমরা আজকের আলোচনাটা সাজিয়েছিও সেভাবেই, যাতে যারা একদম নতুন বা নিজেদের রিসার্চ জার্নি শুরু করছেন তারা মূল আইডিয়াগুলো সহজে ধরতে পারেন।
আচ্ছা,
তো চলুন শুরু করি। ব্যাপারটা কি নিয়ে? আমরা প্রায় দেখি না, দোকানে বা অনলাইনে দু রকমের ছাড় দেয়।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ।
একটা হলো একদম নিশ্চিত ছাড়, ধরুন সোজাসুজি 10% ছাড়।
আচ্ছা।
আরেকটা একটু অন্যরকম, অনিশ্চিত। যেমন বলা হলো 10% চান্স আছে আপনি জিনিসটা একেবারে ফ্রিতে পেয়ে যাবেন।
লটারির মতো।
ঠিক। তো প্রশ্নটা হলো এই দুটোর মধ্যে কোনটা বেশি চলে, মানে কোনটা ক্রেতাকে বেশি টানে?
এটা একটা বেশ ইন্টারেস্টিং প্রশ্ন। আর দেখুন, আগের যে গবেষণাগুলো হয়েছে সেখানে কিন্তু নানা রকম ফল পাওয়া গেছে।
ও, মানে একমত নয়?
না, কখনো দেখা গেছে অনিশ্চিত ছাড়টা বেশি কাজ করছে, আবার কখনো বা নিশ্চিত ছাড়টাই। এই পেপারটা মানে গার্টেগ আর সিমন্সের কাজটা বিষয়টাকে একটু নতুন আলোয় ফেলেছে।
আচ্ছা, কিভাবে?
এদের মূল প্রস্তাবনাটা হলো অনিশ্চিত ছাড় তখনই বেশি আকর্ষণীয় হয়ে ওঠে যখন ওর সমতুল্য নিশ্চিত ছাড়টা ক্রেতার চোখে তেমন একটা দাম পায় না, মানে একটু তুচ্ছ বা সামান্য মনে হয়।
ইন্টারেস্টিং। তুচ্ছ বা সামান্য মনে হওয়া, এর কারণ কি হতে পারে? এটা তো শুধু টাকার পরিমাণের উপর নির্ভর করে না, তাই না?
ঠিক ধরেছেন, এখানেই গবেষণাটার মজা। ওরা কয়েকটা কারণ দেখিয়েছে। প্রথমত, অবশ্যই ছাড়ের আসল পরিমাণটা একটা ব্যাপার। যখন নিশ্চিত ছাড়টা আসলেই কম থাকে, যেমন ধরুন 1% ছাড়, একটা স্টাডিতে ওরা দেখেছে একটা হোটেলে 1% নিশ্চিত ছাড়ের চেয়ে 1% সম্ভাবনা যে পুরো ভাড়াটাই লাগবে না, সেটা লোকেদের বেশি আকর্ষণীয় মনে হয়েছে।
আচ্ছা।
কিন্তু যখন ছাড়টা বাড়িয়ে 10% করা হলো, তখন কিন্তু আবার নিশ্চিত 10% ছাড়টাই বেশি পছন্দের ছিল।
ওহ, তার মানে একটা থ্রেশহোল্ড আছে হয়তো।
হতে পারে। দ্বিতীয় কারণটা হলো তুলনার প্রভাব, মানে একটা ছাড়কে কার পাশে রাখা হচ্ছে।
বুঝলাম না ঠিক।
ধরুন একটা $50 ট্রেনিং সেশন, তাতে $5 ছাড় দেওয়া হচ্ছে, এটা নিশ্চিত ছাড়।
ঠিক আছে।
যেমন পুরো সেশন ফ্রি পাওয়ার সুযোগ বেশি আকর্ষণীয় লাগতে পারে। কিন্তু যদি ওই $5 ছাড়ের পাশে মাসিক মেম্বারশিপে $4 ছাড়ের অফার থাকে,
তখন $5 বেশ ভালোই মনে হবে।
একদম। তার মানে একই ছাড়, কিন্তু তুলনাটা কার সাথে হচ্ছে তার উপর নির্ভর করে সেটাকে সামান্য মনে হচ্ছে কিনা।
বাহ, এটা তো দারুণ পর্যবেক্ষণ। পারিপার্শ্বিকতা কতটা প্রভাব ফেলে? আর কিছু?
হ্যাঁ, আরেকটা জরুরি বিষয় হলো ছাড়টা কিভাবে বলা হচ্ছে, মানে ফ্রেম করা হচ্ছে।
ফ্রেম করা হচ্ছে মানে শতাংশে নাকি টাকায়, এরকম?
ঠিক তাই। ধরুন একটা জিনিসের দাম $11 বা $311। এই গবেষণায় দেখা গেছে এই রকম দামে যদি আপনি বলেন 10% ছাড়, সেটার চেয়ে যদি বলেন নির্দিষ্ট ডলার অঙ্কের ছাড়, যেমন $11 $1.1 বা $311 $31.1, তাহলে ছাড়টাকে বেশি মনে হয়।
তাই নাকি? শতাংশের চেয়ে টাকার অঙ্কটা বেশি লাগে?
হ্যাঁ, অন্তত এই গবেষণার ক্ষেত্রে তাই দেখা গেছে। ফলে যখন শতাংশে ছাড় দেওয়া হয়েছে, সেটাকে তুলনামূলকভাবে কম মনে হয়েছে, আর তখন অনিশ্চিত অফারটা বেশি আকর্ষণীয় হয়ে উঠেছে।
তার মানে পুরো ব্যাপারটা আসলে ক্রেতার উপলব্ধির খেলা। ছাড়টা বাস্তবে কত বড় তার চেয়েও জরুরি হলো ক্রেতা সেটাকে কতটা বড় বা ছোট বলে মনে করছে।
একদম, উপলব্ধিটাই আসল। এটা খানিকটা পিনাটস এফেক্টের ধারণার কাছাকাছি যায়।
পিনাটস এফেক্ট?
হ্যাঁ, মানে যখন লেনদেনের অঙ্কটা খুব ছোট হয়, তখন মানুষ সেটা নিয়ে ঝুঁকি বা জুয়া খেলতে বেশি রাজি থাকে, কারণ হারলেও বেশি গায়ে লাগে না, এই আর কি।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা।
কিন্তু এই গবেষণাটা দেখাচ্ছে অঙ্কটা বাস্তবে ছোট না হলেও যদি কোনো কারণে সেটাকে ছোট মনে হয়, সেটা তুলনার জন্য হোক বা বলার ধরনের জন্য, তাহলেও একই এফেক্ট হতে পারে। মানুষ অনিশ্চয়তার দিকে ঝুঁকতে পারে। এখানে মূল ফোকাসটা কিন্তু নিশ্চিত ছাড়টা কেমন লাগছে সেটার উপর।
বেশ গভীর বিশ্লেষণ। তাহলে এর থেকে আমরা কি শিখতে পারি, মানে ব্যবসায়িক দিক থেকে বা এমনি বোঝার জন্য?
দেখুন, এর মানে হলো অনিশ্চিত প্রমোশন বা ছাড় দিলেই যে সেটা হিট করবে এমন কোনো কথা নেই। এটা খুব বেশি নির্ভর করে নিশ্চিত বিকল্পটা ক্রেতার কাছে কেমন লাগছে তার ওপর। ব্যবসার দিক থেকে দেখলে হয়তো কম দামি জিনিস বা যেখানে ছাড়ের শতাংশটা খুব কম দিতে হচ্ছে, সেখানে অনিশ্চিত অফার মানে লটারির মতো কিছু বেশি কার্যকর হতে পারে।
আচ্ছা।
কিন্তু ছাড়টা কিভাবে বলছেন, পার্সেন্টেজে না টাকায় বা অন্য কিছুর সাথে তুলনা করে বলছেন কিনা, এই সব কিছুই কিন্তু খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ।
তার মানে বটম লাইন হলো নিশ্চিত ছাড়টা যদি কোনোভাবে ক্রেতার কাছে সামান্য বা নগণ্য বলে মনে হয়, তখন অনিশ্চিত ছাড়ের দিকে পাল্লা ভারী হতে পারে। আর এই সামান্য মনে হওয়াটা শুধু টাকার উপর নয়, পরিস্থিতি আর উপস্থাপনার উপরও নির্ভর করে।
ঠিক, একদম তাই। আর একটা জিনিস ভাবুন তো, এই যে আইডিয়াটা, মানে নিশ্চিত ফলাফলের উপলব্ধির ওপর আমাদের ঝুঁকি নেওয়ার ইচ্ছেটা নির্ভর করে, এটা কি আমাদের জীবনের অন্য রিস্কি সিদ্ধান্তগুলোকেও ব্যাখ্যা করতে পারে?
যেমন?
যেমন ধরুন লটারি কেনা। সেখানে টিকিট কাটার খরচটা তো নিশ্চিত এবং বেশ কম, কিন্তু পাওয়ার আশাটা বিশাল, তাই না? অথবা ধরুন লাইফ ইন্স্যুরেন্স,
হ্যাঁ,
সেখানে প্রিমিয়ামটা তো নিশ্চিত খরচ, কিন্তু সেটার তুলনায় সম্ভাব্য যে হিউজ পে আউট, সেটার চিন্তা করলে প্রিমিয়ামটাকে হয়তো অনেকের কাছে অতটা বড় মনে হয় না। এইগুলো নিয়ে আরও ভাবা যেতে পারে, কি বলুন?
একদম, এটা সত্যি ভাবনার বিষয়। नमस्कार।
रिवाइज एंड रीसबमिट में आपका स्वागत है। मैं हूं पावलोव
और मैं हूं निकिता।
आज हम एक बहुत ही दिलचस्प रिसर्च पे बात करने वाले हैं। ये प्रतिष्ठित जर्नल ऑफ कंज्यूमर रिसर्च में छपी है, जो कि एक FT50 लिस्टेड जर्नल है, मतलब दुनिया के टॉप बिजनेस जर्नल्स में से एक। इस जरूरी शोध के लेखक हैं सेलिया गर्टिग, कैलिफोर्निया यूनिवर्सिटी बर्कली के हार्ट स्कूल से, और जोसेफ पी सिमन्स, पेंसिल्वेनिया यूनिवर्सिटी के वॉर्टन स्कूल से। और पता है, जब आप ऐसा काम गहराई से पढ़ते हैं तो एक एहसास होता है कि ये जो ज्ञान है या सहानुभूति या इंसान को समझना, इसे आप किसी सांचे में फिट नहीं कर सकते।
सही बात है, ये चीजें जी जाती हैं, ऑप्टिमाइज नहीं की जाती।
बिल्कुल। तो हम श्रोताओं से कहेंगे कि भाई आप चैनल सब्सक्राइब करें या ना करें, पर ये लेख जरूर पढ़ें। ये ओपन एक्सेस है और बहुत अच्छे से लिखा गया है। लिंक आपको शो नोट्स में मिल जाएगा। तो चलिए इस पर बात करते हैं। खासकर उन लोगों के लिए ये काफ़ी काम का हो सकता है जो अभी एकेडमिक रिसर्च में नए हैं, अपनी रिसर्च जर्नी शुरू कर रहे हैं। ये पेपर प्राइस प्रमोशन यानी कीमत में छूट देने के तरीकों के बड़े मज़ेदार पहलू को देखता है। सवाल यह है कि ग्राहकों को एक पक्की निश्चित छूट देना बेहतर है या उन्हें एक चांस देना कि शायद उन्हें और भी बड़ी छूट मिल जाए, लॉटरी जैसा कुछ।
बिल्कुल। और ये एक पुराना सवाल है कि लोग निश्चितता पसंद करते हैं या जोखिम लेना, मतलब सर्टेनिटी चाहिए या रिस्क। सबूत मिले जुले हैं इस पर, अलग अलग स्टडीज अलग बातें कहती हैं, लेकिन ये पेपर एक बहुत जरूरी फैक्टर पकड़ता है जो शायद पहले मिस हो रहा था।
अच्छा, तो क्या है वो खास बात? क्या मुख्य निष्कर्ष निकला इस शोध का?
बात सामने आई वो ये है कि ये जो संभाव्य प्रचार है, मतलब प्रोबेबिलिस्टिक प्रमोशंस, जैसे किसी चीज को मुफ्त पाने का 10% चांस, ये पक्की छूट के मुकाबले सिर्फ तभी ज्यादा असरदार होते हैं।
सिर्फ तभी?
हाँ, सिर्फ तभी जब वो जो पक्की वाली छूट है वो बहुत छोटी हो या फिर ग्राहक को लगे कि वो बहुत मामूली है, मतलब उसकी फीलिंग वैसी हो।
अरे वाह, ये तो सच में इंटरेस्टिंग है। तो मतलब छूट कितनी बड़ी है, इससे ज्यादा जरूरी ये है कि ग्राहक उसे महसूस कैसे कर रहा है।
एग्जैक्टली, ये सारा खेल परसेप्शन का है। लेखकों ने लगभग 9,000 लोगों पर 5 अलग अलग स्टडीज की और उन्होंने पाया कि ये जो चांस वाले प्रमोशंस हैं, ये ज़्यादा चलते हैं जब एक तो पक्की छूट असल में छोटी हो, जैसे 1% छूट बनाम 10% छूट। दूसरा, जब उस पक्की छूट को किसी बहुत बड़ी छूट के साथ रखकर उसे छोटा महसूस कराया जाए।
अच्छा, जैसे
मान लीजिए एक $5 की पक्की छूट है, अगर उसी के साथ $48 की भी एक छूट दिख रही है तो $5 बहुत छोटा लगता है।
हाँ, सही बात है।
लेकिन अगर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में सिर्फ $4 की छूट हो तो वही $5 ठीक लगने लगता है। तो कॉन्टेक्स्ट बहुत मैटर करता है।
और तीसरा पॉइंट क्या था? वो शायद सबसे चौंकाने वाला है, आपने कहा था।
हाँ, तीसरा ये कि जब पक्की छूट को डॉलर या रुपए अमाउंट में बताने की बजाय प्रतिशत यानी परसेंटेज में बताया जाए,
मतलब
$50 पर 10% छूट कहने के बजाय $5 की छूट कहना।
हाँ, लेकिन ये इस पे डिपेंड करता है कि आप क्या चाहते हैं। अगर आप चाहते हैं कि ग्राहक पक्की छूट ले तो शायद डॉलर अमाउंट बताना बेहतर हो, पर अगर आप चाहते हैं कि वो चांस वाला प्रोबेबिलिस्टिक ऑफर चुने तो छूट को प्रतिशत में बताना ज़्यादा काम करता है, क्योंकि प्रतिशत वाली छूट अक्सर लोगों को महसूस कम होती है, उसकी वैल्यू कम लगती है। ये प्रतिशत वाली बात थोड़ी काउंटर इंट्यूटिव है। मतलब गणित तो वही कहता है $50 पर 10% भी $5 है, तो लोग इसे अलग क्यों महसूस करते हैं? क्या पेपर में इसका कोई कारण बताया है?
हाँ, और यही इस रिसर्च की खूबी है। ये नतीजे कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर की कुछ पुरानी थ्योरीज जैसे डिमिनिशिंग सेंसिटिविटी या ओवरवेटिंग ऑफ स्मॉल प्रोबेबिलिटीज से पूरी तरह मेल नहीं खाते।
अच्छा,
डिमिनिशिंग सेंसिटिविटी मतलब जैसे जैसे पैसा बढ़ता है हर एक्स्ट्रा रुपए की कीमत कम लगती है, और ओवरवेटिंग मतलब लोग छोटे चांस को भी ज्यादा महत्व देते हैं, जैसे लॉटरी में। लेकिन यहाँ बात थोड़ी अलग है। ये रिसर्च एक पुरानी कॉन्सेप्ट पीनट्स इफेक्ट से जुड़ती है।
पीनट्स इफेक्ट।
हाँ, मतलब जब दांव छोटा लगता है मूंगफली जैसा, तो लोग ज्यादा रिस्क लेने को तैयार हो जाते हैं। पर ये पेपर उसे एक कदम आगे ले जाता है। ये दिखाता है कि बात सिर्फ असल में छोटे दाव की नहीं है, बात उस दाव की भी है जो सब्जेक्टिवली, मतलब व्यक्ति को महसूस छोटा होता है।
राइट।
तो जो निश्चित परिणाम है उसका साइज कैसा लग रहा है, ये बात अनिश्चितता के प्रति आपकी पसंद को बहुत ज्यादा प्रभावित करती है।
तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि मार्केटर्स के लिए समझना बहुत जरूरी है कि उनकी जो फिक्स छूट है वो ग्राहक को कैसी लग रही है, सिर्फ ये नहीं कि उसका मॉनेटरी वैल्यू क्या है।
बिल्कुल, निष्कर्ष यही बताते हैं कि जो ये चांस वाले डिस्काउंट है, ये शायद कम कीमत वाली चीजों के लिए या जहां छूट परसेंटेज बहुत कम है वहां ज्यादा इफेक्टिव हो सकते हैं।
बिल्कुल।
और हाँ, छूट को आप पेश कैसे करते हैं, परसेंटेज में या डॉलर में या किसी और छूट के रेफरेंस में, ये सब उसकी इफेक्टिवनेस को बदल सकता है।
तो अगर हम इस पूरी चर्चा को समेटें तो क्या कहेंगे? लगता है ये रिसर्च यही दिखा रही है कि हम ग्राहक के तौर पर हमेशा एकदम रैशनल हिसाब किताब वाले फैसले नहीं लेते।
हाँ,
छूट का जो सब्जेक्टिव अनुभव है, मतलब वो हमें कैसा महसूस हो रहा है, वो बहुत मायने रखता है।
बिल्कुल। और ये एक बड़ा सवाल भी उठाता है
क्या
कि अगर हम छोटी लगने वाली निश्चित चीजों के मुकाबले अनिश्चितता को तरजीह दे सकते हैं, तो इसका असर मार्केटिंग के अलावा दूसरे फैसलों पे कैसे पड़ता होगा? जैसे लॉटरी टिकट खरीदना, वहां जीतने का चांस बहुत कम है पर इनाम बड़ा है, या फिर बीमा चुनना। हम एक निश्चित छोटा प्रीमियम देते हैं एक अनिश्चित बड़े नुकसान से बचने के लिए। क्या इन सब में भी वो जो निश्चित कॉस्ट या निश्चित फायदा है उसका महसूस होने मायने रखता है? ये एक सोचने वाली बात है।
वाकई ये सोचने के लिए एक दिलचस्प पॉइंट है। हम एक बार फिर श्रोताओं को कहेंगे कि ओरिजिनल आर्टिकल जरूर पढ़ें, लिंक शो नोट्स में है। खासकर अगर आप कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर या डिसीजन मेकिंग में अपनी रिसर्च शुरू कर रहे हैं तो ये एक बेहतरीन स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट हो सकता है।